Story 1. I came here expecting a disaster, but found a surprisingly good conversation. Thanks, Reddit. Story 2. I should preface this by saying I grew up in a working class, former mining town far from London, and I am of an immigrant background. Estonian by ethnicity. Estonia was not a member of the European Union when my family moved here before I was born. Firstly, one of the main points people throw around in the Brexit debate is immigration, so let's start with that. Immigration, especially the quotas the European Union was trying to impose on us, were not practical for ordinary people of the United Kingdom. Britain is a densely populated island. We are in the midst of a housing crisis, and our National Health Service is on the brink of collapse. We are struggling to cope with our current population and importing hundreds of thousands of people per year, who statistically are more likely to have larger families, will cause further pressures down the line. The immigration argument is usually mobilized by Remainers to try to paint Brexiteers as racist, when the way some businessmen use high rates of immigration is actually exploitative. Foreign workers are more likely to work for cheaper pay, which meant businessmen employed them in their thousands to get away with underpaying for cheap labor. Native workers could not keep up and lost a lot of work. This is where the idea of immigrants taking our jobs comes from. While many Remainers mock this, it is a serious problem that affects not only underpaid foreign workers but working-class laborers too, who are expected to accept lower pay. The main beneficiaries of this immigration policy are businessmen who exploit foreign workers to increase their profits. Another problem with the European Union is that, as a globalist organization working on a large international scale, it needs to centralize where it can to save time and prevent dithering. What that meant for the United Kingdom is that London became even more of the country's economic center, and a larger proportion of capital flowed toward London. This benefited London and the South East, and is probably why they voted to remain. However, less investment went to smaller towns whose industries were undercut by cheaper industrial prices abroad, a trend facilitated by European Union policy. Industries shut down and people lost jobs. Because much of the money the United Kingdom gained from the European Union went to London, we did not get funding to create new jobs here, and our schools were, and still are, underfunded. One nearby school has only 1% of students achieving the English Baccalaureate, which measures attainment in a core set of academic subjects. The wider picture is not pretty. Local hospitals are constantly running out of beds to treat patients, and we do not receive funding to fix that. Meanwhile, because London received substantial funding from the European Union, it could maintain high-speed rail and large infrastructure projects. That felt like a kick in the teeth for working-class towns and caused resentment. There is much more to it, but something I do not see much in the Brexit debate is recognition that some areas benefit more than others. Did London benefit? On the whole, yes. Whether the forgotten working-class towns in the North and Midlands benefited is an entirely different story. I am not a huge fan of socialism, but I think the European Union's version of capitalism genuinely harms the working class here, whether or not groups that claim to represent working-class interests want to admit it. Story 3. I voted Remain, but recently, and for the first time, I'm seeing some well-reasoned arguments for leaving. I think I may have fallen victim to the echo chamber effect, where all I saw from the Leave side were the most extreme examples of daftness and racism. Likewise, I expect Leave voters have only seen the worst of the Remain side. When I dig deep, I don't actually have any great admiration for the European Union. What made me want to keep them was that I perceive them as keeping the United Kingdom right in check, particularly the Conservative Party. I like that they mean we have certain workers' rights, human rights, business regulations, and so on. I worry that the Conservative Party would ditch those in a heartbeat. But what I'm actually doing is aligning with an undemocratic institution because they've done some things that I like. In exactly the same way that Leavers aligned with the Conservative Party when Theresa May tried to bypass Parliament in triggering Article 50, and Boris Johnson literally broke the law to prevent Parliament debating his deal. I still wouldn't vote Leave, but I wouldn't be so quick to vote Remain either. I think the Conservative Party has been an absolute disgrace through this whole thing, and could have achieved a lot more by taking a measured approach to dealing with Britain's numerous issues that got blamed on the European Union. As a member, we could have addressed issues with the European Union itself. If we were going to leave, they should have had a plan, and they should have had cross-party consensus. That would have been the decent, democratic thing to do, especially given the split result. Instead, they're playing political games and using Brexit to desperately cling to power. I'm still terrified of them. Story 4. I am 29 and voted to leave the European Union for the following reasons. Summary at the end. 1. I work in the development of flexible and renewable power generation in the United Kingdom and have done so for my entire working life. I have installed over 750 megawatts in the last 7 years, a combination of onshore wind, energy storage with batteries, flexible gas generation, and demand-side response technology. 2. My small industry is incredibly important to the United Kingdom energy market. It is critical to the growth of renewable clean generation, and we provide the peaking service that prevents blackouts. Our market was effectively brought to its knees from 2014 to 2019, with several key leaders in the market going out of business or laying off large numbers of staff and essentially mothballing the industry. 3. The reason for the market downturn was a court case brought by an Australian energy consultancy that claimed the method by which contracts were awarded to build generating sites breached the European Union state aid rules, despite the European Union initially approving the process several years earlier. Because of the court case, there was a freeze on payments for existing contracts awarded as early as 2014 and a suspension of any further contracts being awarded. It dragged on until September of last year when it was confirmed that no breach of state aid had occurred. For 3 years, our market was frozen. Hundreds lost their jobs and key developments to grow and modernize the United Kingdom energy sector were halted or abandoned because of a technicality around whether the United Kingdom was breaching European Union rules on state aid. 5. The impact will not only be for the 3-year period. Investors lost interest and moved on to other industries. There were brain drains as development teams were disbanded or shifted to other sectors. Developing a site takes years, and companies need many sites in the pipeline because success rates are low. If you stop all of that and let the machine grind to a halt, it takes a huge amount of time and effort to restart. You will not reap rewards for years because the return rates are low. In an industry as important as energy, this results in a gap in new generation coming online. It may not be visible for 5 to 10 years, but there will be an imbalance between old generation going offline and new generation coming online because of market stagnation. That will lead to panic buying and short-termism by the United Kingdom government and a gold rush in the market with poor quality, high-emission generation coming online to plug the gap, since that is the quickest generation to bring online. People often argue the take-back control line and are told that the European Union does not regulate or specify laws in the United Kingdom. As a developer of power generation in the United Kingdom, I can state that on a daily basis we are required to navigate European Union legislation. This ranges from complex rules around emissions and environmental impacts to more routine requirements such as conducting impact assessments to determine if there are endangered species in the proposed development area. It is important that this kind of legislation exists, but the issue is that the European Union must apply broad policies that cover many diverse nations. It is effectively impossible to lobby for special dispensations because the European Union democratic process is detached from everyday business, and if every industry in every country pushed for exceptions, the whole concept would fall apart. It is well known that the further you are from decision-making, the more disenfranchised you feel, which is why there has been a drive toward devolution across Europe. For example, impact assessments to identify the presence of endangered species can be ill-fitting. Sometimes the species being searched for do not live in the United Kingdom or are abundant here, but because that species might be endangered in Poland or Italy, every site developed across the European Union must go through the same process. It might sound trivial, but we typically have 50 to 100 sites in the pipeline at any one time. Each report might cost £3,000 and take 4 weeks, which becomes a massive financial burden. Summary: I work in power generation development in the United Kingdom. My market was almost destroyed by European Union red tape and misreading or misinterpreting of European Union rules. It may not be true that the European Union dictates trivial things like the shape of bananas, but in my experience, European Union law and legislation must be navigated on a daily basis. Navigating law and legislation will always be required, in or out of the European Union, but lobbying, focus groups, and consultations on legislation are far more effective at a national level. The European Union is too dense and detached from the coalface, and the process often becomes a box-ticking exercise and a burden. Note: to clarify my perspective, Some people interpreted my comment to mean I wanted deregulation so the United Kingdom could become a Wild West. My actual belief is that the people most capable of putting in place effective legislation for the United Kingdom are the United Kingdom government. That does not automatically result in a lowering of standards. It will probably result in improved standards in some areas and lower standards in others to meet specific national needs. I have worked in renewable energy my entire life and have no interest in the rollout of large fossil fuel generators and the destruction of our environment. Note: it was not the Australians' fault as a nationality. The company involved happened to be Australian and had a vested interest in damaging the market. They launched a court case that the European Union failed to resolve quickly, which resulted in long-term stagnation and will have long-term repercussions for the industry and the United Kingdom's transition to lower carbon emissions and increased clean power. Note: there was press coverage of the issue in 2018. It is a niche technical topic, which is why I find the public interest in it surprising and welcome. Story 5. Depending on the industry you work in, continued European Union mandates have favored European multinationals over small businesses. I voted to remain in 2016, after being made redundant in 2019 because of new European Union legislation that decimated all but the largest players in my industry, mobile power systems, where Stage 5 emissions rules required individual type approval rather than calculated outputs and made small bespoke solutions non-viable. And because of other recent measures such as Article 13 and moves to further consolidate power within the European Union, I find myself quite happy that it is happening. Story 6. Synopsis. There is huge inequality in the European Union. Bulgaria still uses horse-drawn carts. Poland has abysmally low wages. British companies take advantage of this. Instead of mechanized farms where soft fruits are picked by machinery, there is a plethora of cheap labor to do the work. The knock-on impact of refusing to innovate and embrace technology is profound. Suddenly, you do not need engineers or service centers with skilled mechanics. Education becomes devalued. The United Kingdom government, and not just the Conservative Party, has systematically ignored this. Under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, discussing the issue could lead to accusations of racism. Governments did little to control the abuse of cheap labor until the Brexit vote, so the choice was effectively made for them. Europe is beneficial in many ways, but the United Kingdom does not fit comfortably. The Common Agricultural Policy was designed to keep French farmers in business and to influence African markets by dumping products, such as powdered milk, at below-cost prices. The policy never made much sense for the United Kingdom, hence the rebate. The European Union has significant problems with the implementation of legislation. It took the European Union until August 2017, after the Brexit vote, to make it illegal to hire people in countries such as Poland and Bulgaria, and then send them to work in France, Germany, and the United Kingdom at far below the local minimum wage. Previously, this was treated as short-term temporary relocation. Companies can legally label a product as containing specific percentages of ingredients and then tailor it to the local market. Birdseye and other manufacturers vary fish and meat content of prepared foods for markets such as Germany versus Czechia and Bulgaria. This helps explain price differences for products like Dove soap across the European Union, where marketing may target France, Germany, and the United Kingdom while production and specifications differ elsewhere. Luxembourg effectively reduces taxable revenue by about €4,000 per European Union citizen per year. A country of fewer than 500,000 people, including foreign workers, has a history of blocking change, with even Jean-Claude Juncker blocking legislation at times. Summary: the concept of the European Union is valuable. The current implementation is seriously flawed. Leaving the Union is unwise. Staying without serious reform is also unwise, and the latter is not viable because the Union has expanded too rapidly. To be clear, Nigel Farage and similar figures have inflamed and polarized public debate on a complex topic. An European Parliament study describes how special-purpose vehicles are used for foreign direct investment and tax avoidance. All of this is academic if we do not address climate change. Consider using ecosia and supporting tree planting. Story 7. I voted Leave during the referendum. While I still stand by my reasons for that initial vote, I changed my view over the course of the absolute nightmare that Brexit became. When I voted, it was primarily because of the federalization of the European Union. I am not opposed to this in principle, but I have never been convinced by how the European government is structured. In particular, I was concerned that the European Parliament votes on legislation but cannot propose new legislation. It can only debate and amend legislation put forward by the European Commission. I believed, and still believe, there is a fundamental democratic deficit in the European Union, and that full integration into a supranational quasi-federation would not be desirable while such a deficit exists. I believe the European Union needs either to federalize fully or to draw back into a looser confederation. The half-and-half state it is currently in does not feel robust or stable enough to be effective. I was very torn when it came time to vote. I have never considered myself European, and as stated above, I had many reservations about the European Union, but I also recognized the advantages of membership. At the time, I believed federalization was inevitable if the European Union was to survive, and so long as major reforms were not put in place, reforms I had despaired of ever occurring, I felt the United Kingdom would be drawn into what would in essence be a federal oligarchy. When I voted, I made a number of erroneous assumptions about how the Brexit process would unfold, which tipped my hand in favor of leave and which did not come to pass. 1. The Conservative Party is self-serving and cruel, but it is not insane. 2. Brexit is by nature a political poison chalice because of the strong opinions on both sides. Europe has always been a divisive issue, and the government must understand this. 3. Because of point 2, a bipartisan commission or committee would be established to negotiate Brexit. This would allow the Conservative Party to have its cake and eat it. Setbacks could be blamed on the Labour Party or the European Union and their own involvement downplayed, while successes and positive outcomes could be promoted as the sitting government delivering the will of the electorate. 4. Even if the Conservative Party decided to go it alone in the negotiations, they would not be utterly incompetent. 5. An election was probably right around the corner because of the mess. Perhaps we could get a Labour Party government or a Labour Party-led coalition, which I believed would negotiate somewhat more competently than a Conservative one. 6. The Leave vote probably would not win anyway, because it seemed like most people supported the European Union or were at least willing to look past its flaws. 7. There would be a deal. We would negotiate a deal. It might not please everyone and it might take a lot of negotiation, but the Prime Minister was not going to try to push the same deal through Parliament 3 or 4 times without meaningful amendment or negotiation, because that would be unwise. While I still stand by my criticisms of the European Union, if there had been a second referendum, I would have voted Remain. Story 8. To give you a genuine answer from an actual Leave voter, the reasons are multitudinous but can be boiled down to the European Union becoming an ever more pervasive supranational organization. The Solemn Declaration on European Union is where the creed of ever closer union originates and is generally a goal the European Union is working towards. A brief history is that the European Union was born from the European Coal and Steel Community, a group of 6 countries that created a common market for trading steel and coal. Free trade is beneficial, and this developed into the European Economic Community, whose goal was to create a common market and a customs union. The United Kingdom joined during this period and, for what it is worth, I think economic cooperation is a good thing. At that time, there were only 3 political institutions with legislative and executive powers. Those institutions evolved under the Maastricht Treaty into what we now call the European Union, and they expanded into many more institutions. The European Parliament remains the only institution elected by European citizens, but it has no legislative initiative. It can only vote on proposals, typically from the European Commission, which proposes legislation and carries executive authority, and whose members are not directly elected by European citizens. Over time, the European Union has grown to encompass more than just a trade union. The Treaty of Lisbon, in particular, consolidated powers in the judiciary, foreign relations, security, and defense, among others. The Lisbon Treaty was unpopular at the time and was rejected in referendums by French and Dutch voters. However, a common pattern in the European Union has been to try again when a proposal fails. Article 13 was first defeated and was widely criticized, but it was proposed again and eventually passed. Now, with the European Union working towards a European army and joint parliamentary sessions, it appears that full integration of nations into a supranational entity is the goal. The United Kingdom already had opt-outs from many aspects of the European Union, from ever closer union to the euro and to frictionless travel in the Schengen area. The United Kingdom did not want to be as closely tied as other countries seemed to be, and therefore it seemed best to part ways. It is not about racism or immigration, but about a desire to remain more independent than to integrate more closely. We can still be good friends without being partners at that level. Story 9. A lot of it comes down to domestic politics being stagnated, and the European Union was a scapegoat for other issues. Towns and small cities across the United Kingdom are deprived of industry, jobs, and the opportunity to move onto the modern stage. Beyond these factors, a majority of people are unhappy with the status quo. The notion of restrictions is important. The European Union imposes high legal and economic restrictions on trade, requiring goods to meet specific quality standards, which can reduce revenue. Additionally, the sovereignty of Parliament is eroded when European Union institutions supersede binding national authority. There are a variety of reasons, but ultimately I think it is the scapegoat argument. Many people, including myself, are trying to remain optimistic about future prospects. Finally, we have a majority government that can pass legislation and actually get things done. So here's to the United Kingdom's sovereignty. I hope we do not mess it up, and that we retain friendship with our European Union partners. Edit. Oh wow, so unexpected. Thank you to the kind stranger for the silver. If I clarified anything by at least 2%, I'll take it. Thanks. Story 10. It's tough to pin down one aspect of why I voted to leave. There were some aspects of the European Union I liked. Most notably, it gave freedom of movement, and I also liked much of what the European Convention on Human Rights did. I found the European Union to be too centralized for my taste. I strongly believe power should be decentralized as much as possible. A law that is good for France may be bad for Italy and redundant in Spain. I love the diversity of culture in Europe, but diversity of law and government is also part of cultural diversity. Getting the voices of ordinary people heard is challenging enough at a national level, never mind when laws are being passed at a continental level. I think the British government is absolutely pathetic and wildly outdated on multiple levels. To fix it, two things need to happen. First, we need to focus attention on Parliament by removing the European Union as a distraction. Second, we need Parliament to be shown for the complete joke it is to spark the desire to reform it. Both have happened because of Brexit, and I believe in time it will lead to reform of our government. I did not vote for Brexit expecting immediate gain. I accept there is a risk of immediate loss. I voted in the hope it will instigate positive long-term changes at local, national, and international levels. I am not looking for immediate benefit. I am not a revolutionary. I am a reformist. Story 11. Mainly because I feel that, to ensure we remain a relatively free society in the United Kingdom, we cannot continue to support a continent-wide government that will continually absorb more and more power from member states. The idea of federalization is a leading aim in the European Union, and it is much easier to impose control on a continent if you are governing the entire continent. Also, the idea of statehood is incompatible with European Union membership, where legislation commissioned and voted on by foreign politicians can outweigh our own acts of parliament. Yes, every member state has a veto, but I cannot even trust my own government not to spy on my emails. What is to stop them from selling us down the river? At least after Brexit, I will only have to deal with one group of privileged, uncaring, nanny status people. Story 12. Why are entire threads with thousands of upvotes being removed here? Story 13. I voted to leave because I think that large, all-encompassing systems of government are dangerous. They can appear appealing and beneficial until they become something like China. I do not want to live in a superstate, and that is what I believe the European Union will eventually become. I did not vote to leave for short-term advantages or faults. I voted for the long term. Story 14. I am a Leave supporter but was not old enough to vote at the time and did not care much then. I will briefly summarize my reasons now, as a European Union law student. My mother is a European Union migrant and a Leave voter. We come from a diverse, fairly working-class background. Firstly, the European Union is a bureaucratic mess that is broken at a fundamental level. European Union institutions and functions are often bizarre and unnecessarily complicated. They have a poor track record and repeatedly legislate on matters with little foresight or proper consideration, despite a complex process. They make massively impactful laws that turn simple things into hassles. The so-called meme ban is a clear example. The General Data Protection Regulation is another. Having to dismiss a cookie pop-up on every page is obtrusive and epitomizes well-intentioned, but poorly constructed regulation that imposes blanket rules without considering practical implications, leading to clumsy implementations that hassle everyone involved. The proposed law mandating USB Type-C ports does not allow for innovation in the technology and treats a minor issue as a major problem, and their solution will probably make it worse. They focus on the wrong things because many decision-makers are unelected and out of touch. Both my parents regularly interact with European Union regulations. I hear a lot from them about the copious red tape imposed by the European Union, which can cripple departments. An example from Port Health. Profiling of importers' track records was done centrally by the European Union, so an extensive database could be collected to identify the best and worst traders. Except they only kept records for a year, which was not long enough to properly profile traders, and the database proved unreliable. Because it was centralized, a complaint from one port had little effect and the system did not improve. The airport had to conduct its own profiling, which took years and only held data for that port, not across the European Union as would have been ideal. The European Union imposed a mandatory check on every nth good being imported that used a different frequency from the United Kingdom and World Health Organization guidance and was inflexible. This required a ridiculous number of laboratory checks, which were hideously expensive, with about £400 of the cost paid by the importer for each check that fell on them. Importantly, the port's regular, high-volume importers were also their most reliable traders, so the extra checks mainly hit the good traders, while the bad traders were largely unaffected. The European Union required that laboratory tenders above a threshold be opened up to the whole European Union. This created delays and higher costs. These factors led to three main problems. First, massive backlogs for port health. It could not cope and there was no way to speed up the process, so perishable shipments such as lobsters and crabs often died waiting for checks and traders lost money on top of paying for the checks. Second, traders chose to import elsewhere rather than face extra delays and costs. Third, the problems the regulations were meant to prevent mostly did not exist locally, and the regulations did little to solve them. Reliable traders absorbed most of the burden. These are just a few of countless examples. When problems like the above occur, there is little possibility of quick reform, and the United Kingdom alone does not hold the power to fix them. If you impose universal standards on countries that operate differently and have different needs, you must be careful that it is done right. I believe the example above was implemented because of problems in some Mediterranean countries that did not apply to the United Kingdom, so we suffered from excess regulation. My final point is that the United Kingdom is the least European Union country within the European Union. We do not fit in the same way many other member states do. We lack a shared European Union identity and are not integrated with mainland Europe at a social, geographical, or cultural level in the way other members are. We are too large to be a backseat member but not integrated enough to be a leading member. The United Kingdom suits a degree of independence that the European Union does not allow. Many of the ideologies, goals, and issues most European Union countries prioritize often do not apply to the United Kingdom. The metaphor of a squabbling married couple deciding they are better off as close friends is apt. We are not right for each other in an institutional sense, but I want a close relationship. A Swiss perspective that I agree with captures some of this. A Swiss citizen wrote that Switzerland is not part of the European Union and has long opposed involvement because European Union policies conflict with Swiss traditions. The volume of regulation the European Union produces every year is enormous and does not fit well in a country with a deeply rooted laissez-faire, mind-your-own-business culture. The competences of the European Union, meaning the topics on which it can legislate, are not rigorously defined and tend to expand every year. In Switzerland, a federal state, institutions can act at the federal level only when the Constitution explicitly allows them. Otherwise, the cantons are competent. From that perspective, a body whose competences are undefined and expanding is suspicious. The European Union exercises power in a way that seems undemocratic from the perspective of a country with direct democracy. The European Commission, a non-elected body, has significant power and takes decisions opaquely and with limited accountability. The European Union dwarfs the voice of the individual because it represents one of 512 million people. It is simply too large to manage centrally, which scares people. A pharmacist I know gave another example. The Falsified Medicines Directive requires that every pharmacy adopt systems to track every medicine from manufacturer to patient in a sealed box so its origin and authenticity can be verified. This was introduced to prevent dispensing fake medicines. In the United Kingdom, this problem was essentially non-existent. Suppliers and systems were already robust, and most pharmacies use one of 3 or 4 suppliers, many owned by the largest chains, so a scandal over fake medicines would be devastating for them. In practice, the law required new quick response code scanners for every computer, training for staff to change long-used dispensing processes, and multiple scans when drugs enter the pharmacy, when they are picked from the shelf, and when they are handed to the patient. Manufacturers changed packaging so sealed packs are difficult to reopen and recluse when dispensing split packs, meaning additional packaging steps. All of this added labor and cost to a sector already under strain. Scanning may take only a few seconds per action, but multiplied across hundreds of boxes a day, it adds significant time. Compliance is inconsistent, and fines exist for non-compliance. Many pharmacies do not follow the directive fully, so the measures feel like a waste of money and time for a problem that was not significant in the United Kingdom. I acknowledge that leaving could be worse. Brexit has always felt like a leap of faith and a risk, but I am willing to take that risk rather than remain in a relationship that seems incapable of meaningful change. I would rather take the leap and see whether we can make it work. I dislike how the process began. Everything was worked out while Theresa May led a minority government, which made the start muddled. If David Cameron had remained in office or if another majority government had taken over, the path might have been easier. Uncertainty is the most damaging thing about Brexit. We desperately needed a majority government with the power to be decisive at a critical time, and the absence of one exacerbated the economic impacts, which might otherwise have been small and acceptable. Story 15. I have no regrets whatsoever. The European Union is increasingly moving toward becoming a federation. Aside from that, the European Union is quite flawed, and the idea that it can be reformed from the inside is ludicrous. I do not want to be dragged down by the Romanian or Greek economies. If it were a union between the Nordic countries, France, Germany, and Britain, I do not think anyone would complain. The countries being so similar in economics and culture would make such a union far stronger, without being held back by much weaker economies that do not consider our views. Edit. This attracted more attention than I expected. To respond to some questions. Yes, Belgium and the Netherlands could join. My entire argument was about economics and how I dislike being a constant financial burden for the union. However, I did not mention race or immigration. Yet many comments are calling me racist for wanting something different from the current union, and you wonder why you keep losing elections. Story 16. I am 29 and live and work in mainland Europe with my European fiancé. I voted for Brexit because I believe Europe has become so tied up in bureaucracy that it has missed the iceberg about to hit the European Union. The euro has devastated the economies of the southern countries and left 4 states effectively funding the European Union budget: Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and Italy. The United Kingdom has just left. Italy is in dire straits. Unemployment in Germany is rising with an economic downturn, and France faces similar problems for different reasons. When the next recession hits, which I think will be in the next 3 to 5 years, no one will be able to keep the European Union afloat. The Greek crisis will be minor compared with what will happen if Italy goes belly up. When that happens, and it will, the choice will be to bankrupt Germany and France or let the European Union collapse. I do not want the United Kingdom to be in the firing line when that happens. As I said, I live in Europe and love the countries and the people. However, the European project to effectively create a United States of Europe was 50 years too early. It will cause far more hardship than good. I do not want to look back on history and think I was part of that. Story 17. I voted to leave because I am a socialist old labor man. The European Union is an organization devoted to taking power away from the accountable level, the national government, so it can be exercised on behalf of big business. Story 18. The European Union is not a democracy. The European Parliament has little real power and is, in effect, a facade. Unelected officials run this organization and do not represent the people of the area. The United Kingdom may be only the beginning of either a complete reform of the European Union or its deconstruction. Story 19. What is the point of replying to this post if you are a genuine leaver? If you express your opinion that you voted to leave a trading bloc, you will be downvoted to oblivion. Everyone should realize this is precisely why a large portion of people voted to leave in the referendum. Their opinions were shut down before anyone asked why they felt that way. Most leavers did vote that way because of immigration. If you disagree with their reasoning, debate them. Do not just label them racist Nazis because they are worried about 300,000 people entering the country every year for 20 years. Personally, as a liberal, I voted to leave because I believe a smaller governing body is better for people. It is more effective for the smaller number of people it serves. An unelected, closed-off group should not be able to dictate laws to 28 different countries. I do not believe the same laws would be effective across culturally diverse countries. Story 20. I voted to leave in 2016, then swung back and forth. In the election that brought Boris Johnson to power, I voted for the Liberal Democrats, the only political party in the United Kingdom that promised to cancel Brexit, apart from the Greens. I moved to my town in 2010. By 2016, the demographic had noticeably changed. I felt intimidated in my own high street in the evening because it was full of groups of Eastern Europeans drinking and smoking in alleyways. They were not doing anything illegal, but from a cultural point of view it made me feel uneasy. Sometimes I would walk down my high street and not hear any conversations in English. It was such a quick and dramatic change that I honestly felt overwhelmed and slightly threatened. I even began to feel alienated. At the same time, I was working in a prison. The majority of people we locked up were British, but 30 to 35% of my prison's population were foreign nationals, compared to the national population of around 11% foreign, so they were massively overrepresented and most of them were Eastern European. They were not in prison for cultural misunderstandings like not paying for a television license. They were there for murder, rape, and drug dealing. While many of the serious crimes were committed against other Eastern Europeans, particularly in cases of rape, there were a lot of British victims. We have a large population of Irish travelers, who are also responsible for a disproportionately high amount of crime. London was targeted heavily by Roma pickpocketing gangs. What my prison experienced was the same as many other large town and city prisons. I was angry, really angry. Some of these people had criminal records from their home countries, but we just let them in, and they caused problems. I never understood why crime was a minor part of the Leave campaign or not mentioned at all. So I voted Leave. Fast forward a few years. The longer it went on, the more I started to realize how much of this was actually our fault. When Eastern European countries joined the European Union, the United Kingdom was one of only a handful of Western European countries that did not place transitional restrictions, and as such we received the brunt of the migration. Why apply for Germany when you can just go to the United Kingdom with no questions asked? Once a community was established, that then enabled the next decade of immigration. For example, Germany, despite admitting large numbers of Syrian refugees, deports tens of thousands each year for criminal activity or improper behavior. The United Kingdom, despite being the sixth richest nation in the world, still does not have a properly funded border force. Deporting a criminal, which under freedom of movement we can do, was considered too much effort. It was not legally impossible. I watched my country almost tear itself apart. After Scotland voted to remain, what I thought was a settled issue, it is now a real possibility that the country I love will not exist by the end of this decade. I am not English or Scottish or Irish. I am Welsh secondarily, but British first, and it pains me to see the discourse that now exists and the rise in racism against many people. The United Kingdom does not feel as pleasant as it did before 2016. As I have become used to Eastern Europeans being here and they have adapted to cultural norms, that sense of threat has lessened. I think the numbers thinning out after the Brexit vote has helped in some way, and I do not feel the same way about them as I did 5 years ago. I am much more positive about Europe and Europeans than I once was, and I see it less as them and us than I used to. My brother is married to a European now. I still think the economic doomsday arguments were nonsense. I remember claims that voting to leave would put us into a severe recession. But when you weigh the pros and cons, I value the Union of the United Kingdom more than the European Union, and if staying in the European Union would keep the United Kingdom together, I would be willing to accept that, especially since my major issues with it stem from my nation's failures to tackle long-standing social problems. Overall, I am confused, to be honest. I do not know how to feel. I wish we could go back to 2016 and call the whole thing off. I was neither happy nor sad on Brexit Day, and I do not think I will be able to say whether it was the right or wrong choice until February 1st, 2030. Story 21. I oppose having a multi-layered political system. I do not disagree with local decisions that affect only small areas being made by local councils, but it seems fundamentally undemocratic to have both a national parliament and an international body making laws on the same issue. Story 22. I am partly commenting so I can find this thread later, but I just wanted to say to the original poster that if you are a Remainer or rejoiner, fair play to you for engaging with people who hold different opinions. That is not something many Reddit users do well. Story 23. I do not think it will benefit or harm me personally. I work for an American company that is unlikely to be affected directly. That said, there are several reasons I support Brexit. The biggest is that the European Union was moving towards a federal system, and I do not think democracy can work at that scale. Tony Blair promised a referendum on the European Union Constitution, but no referendum took place. Another state said no first, but the lack of a referendum prevented a public debate. Gordon Brown then signed up to the Lisbon Treaty without public support, permanently transferring power from elected officials to unelected European Union commissioners. When David Cameron felt a new European Union treaty was risky for the British financial sector, a large part of our economy, and asked for assurances in the treaty, the European Union refused. He vetoed it, and the European Union proceeded without the United Kingdom. The European Union was slowly moving towards a federal system, and the protections for states that did not want to move had been shown not to work. Ultimately, with 28 countries that have different languages, cultures, and economies, a federal system will not work. Democracy would become a system where people vote on local issues in their country. Then leaders negotiate deals in back rooms behind closed doors. I do not think that is real democracy. I want decisions made where we can see them and by people we can vote out if we disagree with their choices. It also brings back the option for left-wing policies. There is a reason why old-school left-wing politicians like Jeremy Corbyn dislike the European Union, even if they do not say so openly to all their supporters. I do not expect a Labour government soon, and I do not want one led by Corbynites. Still, I believe the state should protect people from the unfettered power of global capitalism. That is tricky under European Union law. The short version is that the European Union won a lot of support from the British left because it was to the left of Margaret Thatcher and offered some protection from her policies, but at its core it is a neoliberal institution, and I am not a neoliberal. If people vote for more economic and cultural protection, I think they should get it. That was a major reason people voted for Brexit, and now that we have a government with a new working-class voter coalition, I expect they will receive some of what they asked for. But the biggest reason is simple: Brexit won the referendum. I had extremely mixed feelings on referendum day. After the referendum, I felt we would not be a real democracy if voters who chose the wrong option had to vote again until they chose the right one. Once the vote was in, I felt it had to be honored, and I am still annoyed that so many politicians focused on reversing the result rather than helping the government implement it in the best possible way. Story 24. Many years ago, I could see the European Union's endgame was to create a fourth nuclear and military superpower to even the balance between the West, Russia, and China. I did not want a future in which America and the European Union police the planet and invade anyone in the Middle East or Africa who refused to join the central bank. I also cannot stand Angela Merkel. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.